Before we begin today's episode, I want to invite you to join us this week for Explore Purpose Insiders. So each month I host a Zoom call with people just like you, and we do a deeper dive into what it means to live with purpose. And so this week, Thursday night, 7 p.m. is our second Explore Purpose Insider group, and I want to invite you to join us. It's completely free, and I even have a special guest this week. It's my guest that was on the show last week. Jim Whitt will be joining us, and we're going to do a deeper dive into really what it means to learn what your purpose is and how to discover that. And so if you're interested in this, join us. Go to our website, explorepurpose.com, and fill out the information there. And I'll send you an email with a link to join us for the Zoom call. Or if you don't want to go to the website, you can also click on the link below in the show notes. And I look forward to seeing you at Explore Purpose Insiders. Welcome to Explore Purpose, the podcast designed to inspire you to live with purpose so that you can make a greater impact on the world around you. My name is Conrad Weaver. I'm so glad you decided to join us today for this program, and I'm excited to share this new content with you. If you're a person of faith and attend church, or even if you're not, you've probably heard about a mega church. These are churches that have thousands and thousands of people in them, and they're kind of scattered all over the country here and there. But did you know that 95% of churches in America have fewer than 300 parishioners? And 75% of churches have fewer than 100 parishioners. Today's guest, Dale Sellers, is focused on these small and mid-sized churches and their leaders. And he and his team help them find ways of growing their ministry and sometimes getting unstuck from areas that they feel to be stuck in. And in a way, he helps them discover their purpose. This new focus of Dale's life came only when he came out of a personal crisis, and he had to look inward and learn at what was holding him back and where he was stuck. So if you're not a person of faith, thanks for joining us today. And I want to let you know that this episode will contain lots of references to church and ministry and Jesus. And I encourage you to listen with an open mind. And you can learn how looking inward and even how getting counseling and seeing a therapist can help you discover purpose in your life. So here's my conversation with Dale Sellers. Well, Dale Sellers, welcome to the Explore Purpose podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's good to be here, bro. We go way back.
We go way back, back in the dark ages of church world in a way. So
yeah, it's good to be with you.
It's good to be with you as well. So for our listeners, tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Well, that's a loaded question. So I've turned 60 this coming June. And so I have literally been in ministry for 40 years. Live here in South Carolina in the upstate area near Greenville. Have lived here in this area most of my life, but traveled the country. The first 10 years that Gina and I were married, we traveled with a music group, a couple music groups, and did about 1,100 concerts in churches all over the country. Through that process, really began to fall in love with the local church, the small church specifically, and then came off the road and have worked in just about every capacity you can in a church, other than being the music director. I've never been that. But then pastored a small church myself. Really had huge dreams. I'm a product of the 80s and the 90s. And so when I went to that church in the early 90s, I had huge dreams of just, building a mega church. And the church grew from 30, which was my first Sunday, to 300, to 150, because we had a split in the 8th year. And then 4 years later, we closed it. And so I pastored a small church for 12 years that actually had to close because it wasn't healthy enough to hand off. And that event, or that process of that event, got down on the inside of me really bad. And so I kind of felt like I'd become a failure to God, and took just left ministry, went back into construction. I grew up doing construction with my dad. And then slowly began to serve in some ministry again. And then in 2014, the Lord speaks to me one day and says, I want you to start your leadership ministry. And I'm kind of like, are you kidding me? I'm out of the loop. I don't know anybody. I haven't done anything. And man, since then, I didn't know what to do. So I called a friend of mine named Tony Morgan, who leads a company called the Unstuck Group. My oldest daughter, Tiffany, works there. And so I reached out to Tony and I said, hey, I just need some advice. And so Tony's leading this ministry, and Unstuck works with larger and mega churches and mid-sized churches. And so I'm talking to him on the phone, and we had to make a phone appointment. I didn't know what that was. I've never heard it. I just thought you used to calling people, But so we make a phone appointment, and about halfway through the phone appointment, Tony stops me in the call and he says, Dale. He said, I can't relate to you at all. That's not what you want to hear when you call to a
yeah, no kidding.
He goes, all I've ever done is work with large churches or in the government or in large corporations. I've never worked in a small church setting. I said, well, Tony, all I've ever done is worked in a small church setting, but you need to understand something about the small church. No pastor in America, if they're honest, thinks they're going to pastor 20 people their whole life. Everybody thinks they're going to pastor a larger church. I don't mean a mega church or even a huge church, but nobody thinks they're going to pastor just a handful of people.
Sure.
And I said, I'm going to tell you something today I've never told anyone. I said, I feel like a failure because I thought I'd be there by now. He goes, wow. He says, I've never heard that. He said, I'll tell you what I want you to do. I want you to write an article about what you just talked to me about, and I'm going to put it out on the Unstuck Group site on Tony Morgan Live, and let's just see if it gets any traction. So in April of 2014, I wrote an article called I Thought I'd Be There by Now, Confessions of a Small Church Pastor. And he published it, and I heard from pastors all over America going, that's exactly how I feel.
Wow.
So he hit a nerve. And so Tony then told me about a process called StratOp, where you go in and learn how to do strategic planning. So I was certified in that process. Did that for a couple of years. That I actually worked with the Unstuck Group for a couple of years, specifically in the small church space. And then in this coming July, in July, I think it was of 2018, I became executive director of our organization here called the 95 Network. And 95 stands for the fact that of all the churches in America, of the 300,000 churches that exist, 95% of them have less than 500 people attending. 87% have less than 200 people attending. And 75% of all the churches in America have less than 100 people attending. Yet, though that's the majority of churches, it's the most under-resourced group there is.
Sure.
And most people don't realize that's the way the church is, plays out. And
because most of the time we hear about these mega churches that have multiple thousands.
They're on social media. They have all the resources, but the backbone of the church in America and honestly around the world is the small and the mid-sized church. And so all those years on the road, we would meet pastors. Here we are in our 20s, and we'd meet these pastors, and we would literally gather around them and pray for them to encourage them, because the majority of them that I met, even back then in the 80s and the 90s, were discouraged. And so at 95 Network, we exist to come along beside and encourage the small and mid-sized church pastor, and we try to give them health-building resources. Our focus is not numerical growth first. We do want you to grow numerically because that means you're reaching more people. But our focus is health first. And what I always say is, if you have a church of 30 and it's not healthy, we don't want it to be a church of 200 because it's just a bigger mess.
Sure.
And so our entire focus here at 95 Network is to come along beside, support, and encourage the small and the mid-sized church pastors with resources and things like that. And then last September, I released my first book. I wrote a book. It was published by David C. Cook, and it's called Stalled: Hope and Help for Pastors Who Thought They'd Be There by Now.
Wow. Well, congratulations on the book. I want to ask you this, going back to that moment where you first said, you know what, I'm a failure. Would you say you've had a crisis of purpose at that point?
That's one way to word it, but the reality is this. It goes back to my childhood. It goes back to doing construction with my dad. My dad and I worked wonderfully together. I know you grew up being a hard worker as well, but I used to go to the job with my dad when I was 6 and 7 years old. And in the summers, when I went to high school, we had 3 solid months off, June, July, August. And so I worked all summer with my dad. Back when you'll love this. When I went to high school, you could miss 30 days in the school year, and I would miss every one of them because I'd go work. I'd take a whole week off and just go work with dad, and so that was part of who I was. And so we worked wonderfully together. I don't question that my dad loved me or loves me, but the problem was my dad's not verbal, and as you can already tell, I'm highly verbal. and, and my mother was verbal. And so I found myself working harder as a kid and as a teenager, and even as a young adult, to try to get my dad to acknowledge me. So like if we came over and we did work for you and your family, he would sit and tell you guys, oh boy, Dale did a great job here, and he'd point out all this stuff, but he never told me. And so what happened was I began to work harder, try to get him to notice me. And somehow in my life, somewhere there, I shifted that toward my walk with God. And so I found myself, you could ask me, okay, we could do a concert and have, 500 people there and 50 people give their life to Jesus. And you could ask me, how'd you feel about that? And I would be like, well, it should have been 550 people and 51 people should. I never let myself.
Never measured up to your expectations.
And I used to, this is so wild because this just came back up in my mind when I was writing the book because I'd already forgot about it. I used to say all of the time, I have this image of what a good man is or a great man or a mature man is, but I just can't attain it. And it goes back to the title of the book. I thought I'd be there by now. The problem was I didn't know where there was. And so I couldn't fulfill my purpose because I had set the bar. I didn't set the bar high. I set the bar out of sight. And so I couldn't fulfill my purpose at all. And somehow it morphed into becoming all about all the things I could do. See, I grew up in a Baptist church where you were taught you're saved by grace through faith, free gift, free gift, free gift. You can't do anything to make God love you anymore. You can't do anything to make God love you any less. Then those same people would spend the rest of their life proving how saved they were by their works.
And that's what you call religion.
Yeah, and I had a lot of it. I had a lot of it, didn't know it. So all of this, it took its toll on me. And actually, this past December, 6 years ago, I had quadruple bypass surgery.
Oh, wow.
At 53 years old. I was 100% blocked in one artery and 90% blocked in three arteries and didn't know it. I had what they call a widowmaker. And my surgeon, I asked him, I said, how did this happen to me? Because we don't have heart disease in our family. I've never smoked except for 6 months in high school, but I didn't inhale because that's bad for your lungs. Blew it out. I've never been severely overweight. And he said it was hypertension and high blood pressure because of your vocation. I said, are you saying the ministry almost killed me? He said, that's exactly what I'm saying. And so I said something really stupid. I said, well, my stress is good stress. I love what I do. And he goes, Dale, your body doesn't know the difference. So I'm going to turn 60 this coming June. And I feel like only in the last 5 years have I actually started living.
Wow. So before that 5 years, ago, how is what you did then and who you were, how were those the same or different?
I don't think Jesus is keeping score anymore. Whereas before, I felt like he was always keeping score. I always felt like he was disappointed with me. I always felt like no matter what I did, that it wasn't quite enough. But Jesus would be like, Dale, I can't believe you wasted all the things I've given you. And you got to understand, again, you can already tell I'm a stinking mess. All right. But growing up in high school, our church would do these things called youth rallies. And you'd go to these youth rallies and the pastors would always get up and say this, when you get to heaven, there's going to be this big movie screen and it's going to show the video or the movie of your life. And they're going to show all the people that are in hell that you didn't reach because God intended for you to be the person to save them all. And it's like, and Jesus is going to look at you with a sad eye, maybe a tear running down his face, going, well, I guess I'll let you into heaven. And see, as stupid as that sounds, I believed it. So I'd walk down the halls of high school and go, oh man, I didn't win all these people to Jesus. He must be mad at me. Or I'd go to a Clemson football game and there's 80,000 people there and go, now that I've been here, I'm responsible. And I know that sounds so messed up, but all that got down on the inside of me. And so I just felt like I couldn't do enough. But again, it goes back to the fact was I didn't know where there was. And the difference today is I realized I'm as it says in one of the older texts, I'm accepted in the beloved.
What was the process for you to discover that?
I have a friend in Dallas, Texas named Bob Hamp, who is a counselor. But when I just basically our church that you used to work at that I worked at, we took our church through Freedom Ministry, and Bob did a teaching called "The Problem Jesus Came to Solve," and that teaching changed my life. And it basically says this, if you ask people, why did Jesus come? They'll always say, well, Jesus came to pay the penalty on the cross for our sins and die for us, and which is absolutely true. But if you listen to Jesus define why he came, he always said, well, I've come to give you life, or I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I want to give you life and life more abundantly. And so what Jesus said of himself was, I've come that you might have life. Well, the reason he did that is because that's what we lost in the Garden of Eden. There was 2 trees in the garden, but we always talk about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But the Bible says in the same verse that tells us about that tree, there's the tree of life was there.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Bob says, Jesus, if you ask people, like if I ask you today, how's your spiritual life, Conrad? How you doing? If your first thought is, well, let's see, this week I read my Bible, I gave my tithe, and I helped an old lady across the street. Oh, I'm doing good. Or you go, oh man, I cussed under my breath. I lusted in my heart. And I kicked the cat. When your natural response is to think about your performance,
mm-hmm.
then again, it's about us thinking that we can do good on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this line. And again, I'm in 1 minute trying to do a phenomenal teaching that Bob did. Jesus didn't come to make bad people behave good. He came to make dead people alive.
Mm.
Somewhere in there, something clicked for me that he's not keeping score, that he's not mad at me, that I don't have to save the whole world. And then just to go to another level, this past summer, I took a sabbatical, 40-day sabbatical. I've never been on sabbatical in my life. And the first week of it, we were at the beach. Our family, my wife and Gina and my daughter Lydia, we got caught in a rip current and got pulled way out, and I almost drowned, which is the second time I've almost drowned. And it broke me. And so what I did was I called up Bob and I said, hey, I need help. I'm broken. And so I went for counseling for a week, sat on his couch. I have never done that in my life. I wasn't opposed to it. I just never did. And what Bob helped me to see was, he says, I always put the needs of other people first. He said, what do they tell you on the plane? Put on your mask before you put someone else. But that's not the way that I've operated. And that's the way pastors are. We'll kill ourselves to take care of everybody else. And Bob said, you're no good to anybody if you do that, Dale, because you can't help people because you yourself are dead. And so I began to understand a lot of, there was just so much performance based in me that affected or that affected how I viewed my walk with God.
So what motivates you to do what you do today?
It's really simple. When I get to heaven, and this is not a works thing. I want to make sure I clarify that. I don't feel like I have to do this, but what I'd love to see happen is when I get to heaven, I would love to see Jesus, and I'd love for him to give me a little fist pump and say, thanks for helping small churches. Yeah, that's what motivates me is, I used to lay on the floor of my office and cry for a friend because I was so lonely. And again, I didn't want to unload on my wife. I didn't want to unload on my kids, all the stresses and pressures of ministry. I wanted my kids to grow up to love the church and love Jesus. I wrote an article about this recently. I had this one board member that I actually reached out to and said, hey man, I'm not doing so well. I want to kind of share some stuff with you. And he said, stop. I can't hear this. My life is a mess. I need your life to be perfect. So please don't tell me. And I said, oh, okay.
Wow.
Who do I talk to? And so that reinforced, just the loneliness of it all. And I don't feel that way anymore. When if I could get just totally to the underneath it all, I used to hate the verse. I shouldn't say hate. I didn't like the verse where Paul says to live as Christ and die as gain, because I didn't want to die. Because I felt like God was mad at me, and when I got to heaven, it wouldn't be enough. I'm good with that verse now. And so every day I want to live for Jesus. I want to help somebody. I want to be available. If people call us, and we get calls from all over the country here at 95 Network, when a pastor calls or sends an email, I respond to every one of them. If people call, they want to be part of what we're doing. I take every call because every call is an opportunity to minister to somebody. So.
When you said that, I wasn't alive, I wasn't, I need life. How much more impact can you have when you're living in your purpose, when you're walking in your purpose, and when you're really, truly alive?
You do what you were created to do. I think most of our lives, John Maxwell used to say this all the time, and it really bothered me. He'd say, when you drive by most graveyards, that's where most people's dreams are. They died with their dream in them. And God won't let you experience or walk in your dream or even walk in your purpose as long as you think you're the one that's got to make it happen. So you go back to Abraham, and God promised Abraham, "I'm gonna make you the father of countless people," and all this stuff. But what does he do when Isaac's born? He tells him to go sacrifice him. And in Hebrews, the Bible says that basically Abraham received Isaac back from the dead. Figuratively speaking, he killed him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what God always does with your dreams, because he wants you to understand your dream's not your dream. It's his dream for you. And you can't do it independent of him. And I've always been guilty of going, oh, the Lord gives me a little bit of a direction. And I go, okay, I got it here. And I take off.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, no, you got to walk in step with me. And so fulfilling your purpose is just understanding that, the most important thing is living in with on a daily basis with Jesus, and understanding you're the apple of his eye. And that took a while to accept for me.
Mm-hmm. How do you keep that focus, that attention on that focus and on that purpose? How do you keep focused on the purpose?
Well, it's really simple. I have this little thing that we talk about around here at 95 Network called we don't want to touch the glory. Because what I have seen in my life, and I know you've seen this too, I've been in ministry a long time. I've seen lots of people come and go. I've seen big time pastors come and go, and small church pastors come and go. Mm-hmm. And what happens is God will not share his glory with anyone. Mm-hmm. And so what I have found happens is you get to a place in your life where either one, you think it's about you. You think, oh, I made all this happen. Or you think, I got to make it happen. Mm-hmm. If you get to that place in your life, you get to where Samson got to. Remember how Samson kept playing around with his anointing, and he would kind of tell Delilah, because he was anointed to take out the Philistines. That's mm-hmm. what he was called to do. And he kept playing around with that. He kept getting flippant with it. He kept teasing with it. And then one day he finally wears down and tells her the truth. And it says this. I think this is one of the scariest verses in the Bible. Delilah says, he wakes up, hey, the Philistines. And he says he got up to go do what he'd always done, but did not realize the Spirit of God had departed. Mm. I don't ever want to get there. And I'm not talking about necessarily my salvation, but just my ability to be effective and to help people's lives. I don't ever want to do it in my own strength. So we literally, just before I got on with you, every Monday morning at 9:00, our team has a prayer call. And one of the things we pray every Monday, every week is, Lord, please don't let us touch the glory. Please don't take your hand off what we're doing, because we started thinking it's about us. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's about us. I think I get to be in partnership with Jesus. I get to walk into what he created me to do or to be. And I also, I get to share my story with people. But if I don't get to do any of that, I'm still good. Mm-hmm. And that's what's different now. It used to be that I wasn't contented with that. Mm-hmm. There was always this thing gnawing at me going, oh, but you need to be doing this. You know what? If today someone calls and says, hey, we fire you from 95 Network, it's over. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think pastors and even, business leaders or leaders in general, why do they lose their focus?
It's really simple to me. So if you ask me, and again, my space is the small church. Why are 95% of all the churches in America small or midsize of the 300,000? I think it's really simple. There's two things that I think. One is there's this book called the Bible. And there's a guy named Jesus. He started this thing called the church. And in Ephesians 4, he told us exactly how to do it. He says, I'm going to give you these ministry gifts, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, to equip saints to do ministry. We don't do that. We don't equip saints to do ministry. A lot of the larger churches, the reason they are larger is because that is what they do. Mm-hmm. But the majority of churches don't do that. So why don't small churches equip? Well, there's one of two reasons. One is the pastor defines his life by by his ministry. In other words, instead of ministry being what he does, it's who he is. Mm-hmm. And when you get to the place in your ministry that you define your life by what you do, then the success or failure of it makes you a success or failure. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where I was. Mm-hmm. And so you don't raise up people. You don't give off ministry. You don't share with people because you need to do everything to be needed because it fills your emotional tank. Mm-hmm. So you like for people to say, oh, yeah, did you hear how Pastor Conrad got up at 3 a.m. and went to the hospital? And that fills their tank. Mm-hmm. The problem is you can't keep living that way.
Sure.
Because and so that's one of the big things is a lot of our pastors define their life by what they do instead of ministry being just something they do, and they are who they are because of who they are in Jesus. They're a husband, a dad, a mom, a parent, a friend, but they don't see that. And then the second thing is the just the way our churches, or the governmental setup of our churches in America, typically is not biblical. So we have the American government version of in the church, and you can't find that in the Bible. This whole congregational democratic kind of deal, where people view the pastor as a hireling, and they look at the pastor and say, "We hired, we're your boss. You work for us." That's not healthy. And so because of those two things, the church is not allowed to flourish and grow because it's not set up correctly. And I see that a lot.
So how can a leader really go back and get their purpose back and discover that purpose and really begin realigning themselves as who they are with what they're supposed to be, actually who they're supposed to be?
Well, I think the first thing you have to acknowledge, and this is going to be an answer you're going to think kind of came out of left field, but then you think it did. I think a lot of us are layered with trauma. I think, I did not know till I went through my experience this summer. I did not recognize, I had not been told this, that the trauma has the same effect on you as a physical injury. So if you and me are out cutting wood together one day and I cut my arm off with a chainsaw, I don't look at my arm and go, "Oh, I cut my arm off," and we keep working. We deal with that. Right. But when it comes to trauma, and most of us experience trauma as kids, as teenagers, in our early years. And if you're in ministry, you've had lots of trauma. We've been told as the leader, you're supposed to suck it up. You're supposed to, you're supposed to lead through that. Don't be a wimp, or all those kind of things. And so we bury these levels of trauma down on the inside of us. And so, you and I had talked earlier before we started about PTSD. I think the church is full of leaders that have not even post-traumatic stress, just traumatic stress.
Traumatic stress, right?
Because because trauma, once it gets inside of you, it doesn't go away. It cycles around. It never leaves you until you begin to deal with it. And we haven't even been taught that. So we don't talk about mental health. We don't talk about working through those kind of issues. And so we get to a place that we're wound so tight that we lose our ability to be effective. And see, sometimes the things that are bothering us happened in our life 20 years ago, but we don't recognize it. And it's kind of like when I grew up in elementary school, we had this game outside called a tetherball. And it was, the ball on the rope. And I think that describes a lot of pastors, is we're wound so tight because we've got layers of trauma. We don't get help. And honest, I just got to be honest, Conrad, a lot of churches beat their pastors up. And they have nowhere to turn, and you get so dysfunctional that you're just trying to get through the day, and instead of embracing your purpose, instead of becoming a man or a woman of purpose, man, you're just trying to survive. And God didn't call us to survive; He called us to thrive. But you can't thrive if you're in survival mode, if that makes sense.
Over the past 2 years, I've interviewed a ton of firefighters and other first responders, and they get their own self kind of wrapped up in who they are with what they do. I'm a firefighter. I'm a police officer.
Yes.
And when they retire, the average lifespan of a firefighter or a first responder is 58 years.
Yeah.
Because when they retire, they lose their sense of identity. And they lose their sense of purpose. And when you don't have your purpose, and when you don't have that, you're not alive, right? And so you don't have
the same thing.
Pastors is the same thing, right?
They define themselves by what they do. Right. We have one of the guys on our team. His name is John Sanders. John is a first responder as well as in ministry as well. He kind of does both, and he talks about that. And one of the other things that's happening is the suicide rate is really skyrocketing in these arenas because of the stress. Because we're not. Again, if a pastor is told to suck it up, certainly a firefighter or a police officer, and then we have this political climate that we've had the last few years, and we have a national pandemic or international pandemic. I mean, that's just, everybody's got so much stress. And if life is wrapped up in what you do, at some point, if things are going good, you're great. But when it goes south, if you've been told to buck up and you can't be real, and, if you forget to put your mask on first, you'll suffocate.
Wow. So What's the answer?
I think you got to find who you are in Jesus. And again, of course, you said that, Dale. You're in ministry, but it's the truth. We were created by God to fellowship with Him. That was the intent with Adam and Eve, to walk with Him. And in my book, I talk about the fact that Jesus wants in ministry. He wants us to do ministry from Him and not for Him. That's a big difference. If you feel
what is the difference?
Well, if you feel like you got to do ministry for Him, you feel like, that you're being engaged and measured and keeping a score. But when you do ministry from Him, you're just letting Him work through you. That's the difference in my life today. I don't try to do ministry for Him because honestly, there's nothing He needs. What do I have that I can offer God? What do I have that I can offer Jesus? He doesn't need anything. Even our whole serve mentality that we have in a lot of our churches, sometimes it's guilting people into serving to fulfill what we want them to do. And we tell them, man, God needs you to do this. No, He doesn't want you to. He doesn't need you to do things for Him. What He wants you to do is walk with Him daily and be a pipeline that He ministers through you. And that's the difference in my life today is, the things that God has done and the doors that have opened in the last 5 years, specifically now for 95 Network, no man could open. The opportunities, the things, our team consisted of 2 people this time last year, and now we have 13.
Wow.
I couldn't make that happen. And these people are from all over the country, and they're some of the greatest people you'd ever meet in your life. I can't, none of this stuff that's happening in my life. In fact, I looked at my wife, Gina, the other day, and I said, you know what? I think I'm being used. And that's the goal. It's just to get to a place where I walk daily with Jesus, where I enjoy His presence. I don't get religious about it. He never intended for us to do that. And I just let Him work through me as He chooses. And I don't have to make things happen. So if I could describe it this way, I feel like today I live a pressure-free life. That's a good place, man.
That is a good place.
Pressure-free life, and I wake up every day going, okay, today's going to have some opportunities. And then some days they're just regular old days. And
so maybe you'll have a pastor of a church of 250 and he will say, yeah, you're not pastoring a church. You have a pressure-free life. Of course.
We're a nonprofit. We have to raise all of our money. As we get into this new year, in the last 4 years, we've had almost $900,000 committed to us. That I can't make that happen. So you talk about pressure. We have people we're responsible for, making sure they get covered, paid, and I take very seriously what we do. But again, the pastor who would say that I can assure you that pastor thinks they have to make things happen. And it goes back to something that I heard Andy Stanley say years ago. Sometimes we talk about in the church, we don't want to talk about money. And Andy Stanley was talking about, the reason we don't talk about money is because there's this assumption if you talk about money that people will leave your church. Well, but Andy said, so you assume the opposite to be true. If you don't talk about money, they'll stay. He said, people still leave your church. In fact, the reality is this: everybody's going to leave your church. They're going to die, move away, or change churches, and you're going to leave your church one day. So I guess one of the great ways I could illustrate that I live now is I live more open-handed. I don't feel like I have to make things happen, and I don't have to hold on to it. And I think again, it goes back to what we said earlier, a lot of pastors, because they define their life by what they do, they have to hold on to everybody. So, you go and you train somebody, you get them all trained, and then they move away or go to another church, and you spend 6 months or either the rest of your life angry at them because you poured into them and they were your people. Pastor, none of those people are your people. They're not your people. They're Jesus's people. And sometimes He uses you to be a launching point or a setting point to train people and get them ready. It's about the kingdom. And that's the thing I think we miss today the most, is we don't talk about the kingdom enough. We focus mostly on our own individual little worlds. And as I heard it said one time, if your whole focus is, if your world is wrapped around you, you have a very small world.
That's in working on this new thing, Explore Purpose. My focus is my listener and helping them, inspiring them to live a life of purpose and meaning so that they can impact others.
Yep.
Because if I'm not living out my purpose, my impact is minimal. Or it's going to be a negative impact, right?
Boy, we could spend the rest of the day on that one. Yeah. You close down the pipeline. Again, if there's one thing that I would love to put inside your listeners today, is that little thought that God intended for us to do ministry from him and not for him. When you think it's about you or what you just described, we're the ones that tighten up the flow. Mm-hmm. And that pressure, you live in that pressure all the time. And still I know God could still use us at some level, but man, he just wants us to open up the pipeline. It's funny because I heard Pastor Jack Hafer talk about this a year ago. He was talking about giving, and he'd gone through a personal crisis where his finances were getting tight. So he stopped giving, and then, things kind of went south for him. And he said he was praying about it one day, and he was kind of whining to the Lord. And the Lord said, I'm not the one that closed off the spigot. You are. Well, I think that's what happens to us when we get so wound tight that instead of, as we get older, we should live in more freedom. By the time that I reach the end of my life, I should be the most loving, the most forgiving, the most caring, the most compassionate. My desire should be to pour into as many of the next generation as I possibly can. And honestly, Conrad, I see a lot of pastors, the older they get, the meaner they get, if I could say it that way, or the more shut down they get, or the more arrogant they get, or the more legalistic they get. And I'm just going, man, somewhere in there, you've been closing down that, the faucet. You've been closing down the spigot from the South. You've been closing down the spigot, And man, I want to live more open-handed. In fact, I've already got a young man right now that I'm training. I've already announced to our team that I'm training to take over this ministry in the next 10 years.
That's awesome.
It's not successful if I don't raise up a successor.
Yeah.
And most churches don't do that.
Going back to the spigot analogy, I remember back when I was in youth ministry at the church that we worked at together, I often told our teenagers, said, be a spigot. I said, let God's love flow through you to others. And so that really comes back to me as
now we want to make sure we tell everybody, if you're not from the South, that it's faucet. But here in South Carolina, it's called spigot. Right. We refer to a garden hose as a hose pipe.
Right. So, that was a new one for me. When I moved to South Carolina from Ohio, I was like, what in the heck is a hose pipe?
Hose pipe, or crack your window, which means to let your window down your car. But that's what a spigot is. And honestly, the freer we get, the more confident the more our confidence is in who Jesus made us to be, and that we are accepted in him, as it says, accepted in the beloved, then the more open we can be, the more transparent we can be. I don't live my days hiding anything, because there's nothing to hide. One of the things I learned, and I put this in the book, the Bible says we have this treasure, this presence of the Lord, and these jars of clay, one translation called cracked pots. Well, I spent the first 55 years of my life trying to pretend like I didn't have any cracks, that all those things, I would try to gloss them over. And then I discovered that because he does his work on the inside of us, the cracks is where he shines through the brightest. If you've been messed up, I tell everybody, hey, the best person to ever pray for you if you're sick is someone who just got healed. The best person to help do counseling in your life is someone who just overcame, who just went through it. And so I don't spend my days anymore trying to pretend like I don't have the scars and the cracks of life, not just ministry. Just this is true for anybody, whether you're in ministry or not. The treasure we have, the fact that God so loved the world that he sent his son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. That is the gospel. That gospel is that he wants to live inside of us. He wants us to fulfill the purpose that he called us to be by, first of all, allowing him to be who he wants to be in us. Well, you can't spend all your time and energy trying to cover up the fact that you got those cracks and those areas and those scars. Let him shine through them, man. I think that's what's worked most for me.
So what's a practical thing that someone can do that can move them toward exploring their purpose or discovering their purpose? What's something practical?
Get counseling. Especially if you're a leader, you are not that good. I don't know you personally, but I'm telling you now, because I've hung around the biggest and the best and the smallest. We're not that good. We need somebody. And again, when Promise Keepers come around and you're supposed to get in groups of guys every week and pour your stuff, I just ain't doing that. And I'm just going to tell you, because the problem is I got to know that you love me. I'm not going to be honest and transparent and share my stuff if I think you're going to judge me or you're going to leak it out to our friends.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to have somebody you can open up to and talk to and share. Obviously, first of all, it's your spiritual life. You're doing that with God. But if you're broken, it's just the most bizarre thing. If you break your arm, you go to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
If you think you've got cancer, you go to the doctor. In any physical arena, you go get help. But when it comes to emotional, internal stuff like that on the inside, we just think we're supposed to keep it to ourselves. And you will either explode or implode if you do that. And I think it's important that the most practical thing you can do today, especially if you're a leader, is go find a couch and sit on it and just share, be honest, because it's very helpful to do that.
Yeah. Well, I've seen that with some of the folks I'm working at, on with my film. I've seen them, broken. I've seen them and being willing to, I'll tell you this, and kind of back to your statement about you don't like going into the group and having that group thing. I was invited to an AA meeting a few years ago when I was working on a documentary about opioid addiction. And I went down to DC, a DuPont Circle area, DC. There's an AA group there that meets, that has been meeting every day for 30 to 40 years, every single day. And there's guys in there that have come every day for all those years. I'm telling you, it wasn't a spiritual atmosphere. It wasn't, but it was spiritual. Yeah. It wasn't a religious atmosphere.
There you go.
It wasn't a Christian, atmosphere. It was a 12-step AA group. Mm-hmm. I have never felt so much love and acceptance from any group I've ever been in. And I was a total stranger.
Yeah.
Those people, they were as black and white and straight and gay and just the whole gamut of human society was there. And the love that was expressed with each other, because you know what they all knew? We're all broken.
Yep. I think sometimes you can find, you may have to edit this one out. I think sometimes you can find more love acceptance at a bar than you can at a church.
I would have to agree with you.
I mean, just, it's not that I hang out in bars, but it's just, once somebody's had 2 or 3 drinks at them, they get transparent. And you get to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. If they have an anger issue, you discover it. If they have other issues, you discover it. Yeah. But I just think that the church in America and around the world, but specifically the church in America, is literally being transformed right before our eyes. Because you look around, since we're not in a post-pandemic mindset, by the way. We're still in whatever this is. The football stadiums are packed. The malls are packed. The concerts are packed. All secular environments, events are packed. There's one area that's glaringly the exception, and that's the church. People have not come back. And I think part of that reason is because after a year and a half, they've gone, I haven't been to church in a year and a half, and my life's still the same. Now, I'm not one of these guys that advocate that we shouldn't get together. I think we should. I've been pushing churches to do a better job with online and stuff. Yes, but there are pastors who are kicking and screaming right now, and I'm making them mad right now as I say this. That are like, well, the Bible says don't forsake the assembling of yourself. You're together. I get that, but that's one verse. And they built a whole theology around that one verse. Church it's not supposed to be about me, y'all come and watching me do my thing. Come watching our band play. Come check out our light show. And again, all that stuff's wonderful. But if that's the reason we gather, if when people leave your church or leave your meeting, if they're talking about what a communicator you are, how great the music was, how cool everybody's clothes were, the lighting or the aesthetics, if they leave and they're not talking about Jesus, or they're not talking about other people's lives that are being impacted, then I think sometimes it's about the show. And it's really funny because most people think that only the mega churches or the big churches are personality driven. I can assure you, in the space that I work in, every church is personality driven. It's about the personality of either the leader being, whether that's the pastor or maybe some board member, because some churches, the pastor is not the leader, the board member is. And it's never been supposed to be about that. It's supposed to be about Jesus. And what's I think is so cool is we're at a place now to where things are so bad across the country in our churches that we're having to reach out for help. That we're having to actually start praying and asking Jesus to guide us and direct us. And so I'm really excited about where the church is going because it's literally being transformed right before our eyes to become more real and to become more relational and not be about the show, but be about Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Have you worked with churches overseas and other places around the world?
Been to Honduras, been to Dominican Republic. I've done some video things through Purpose Driven Church that have gone all around the world. Same thing. Mm-hmm. See, the sad news is when and we used to do this. I think, did you go to Trinidad with us?
I did. I was there on the first trip.
Yeah. Okay, so we go to in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, when we go on short-term mission trips, which is like a week or 10-day mission trip, for a lot of people, it's a vacation. It's an opportunity for them to go to Trinidad or Honduras or Dominican or somewhere to see something. And so what we've done as missionaries in a lot of cases is we've gone to other places and tried to make them just like our American churches. So the Trinidad is a great example. You remember how the steel pan band would come to. So we go to Trinidad, and I actually was asked to preach on a Sunday morning at the church. They're up there and they're singing old hymns a cappella. And I'm like, where are the steel pans? Oh, we don't use them here. I'm going, why would you use them in the U.S. to get us to come over here? And we get over here, and so it's like it's all flip flop. And what we got to learn how to do is just be who we are in Jesus. You know what I'm saying? And so I found that a lot of the issues that we deal with in the American church were also happening in other places because we're the ones that kind of tell them, this is how you do it. And maybe we need to relearn that it's all about falling in love with Jesus. That's really what it's all about. And then just, walking with him daily.
Yeah. So as you look at your life and as you look at your end run, your last 20 years, what's that going to do? What's your focus going to be? How's your purpose going to be the same or change?
The main thing is the pressure's gone. Right. And so I'm going to live, I feel like I want one of the things that I went through when I had to go for counseling after almost drowning, I had two questions that I had to talk to with my counselor. The first one was I go, look, you got to tell me, am I going to die early? Because I'm going to turn 60 this year. I'm like, I want to live a long life. And I had to come to grips with the fact I don't get to make that choice. All my days were determined before one came to being. And I want to live a long life. I want to do my 2 grandkids. I want to do their weddings in the future. If that's the Lord's will. But I'm okay if I don't get to, because I'm going to live every day for Jesus. And then the second question I asked him, I said, okay, I went on this sabbatical because God called me to go on the sabbatical. I'm not doing anything wrong. We're just playing in the ocean and we get sucked out in a rip current and I almost drown. And I said, I want to know something. Where was Jesus? And so my counselor, he does this, and it's really weird. He prays with his eyes open and he goes, okay, Jesus, Dale wants to know where you were. And I close my eyes because I'm like, I can't watch him do that, And so it's immediately, as soon as he prays that, I just start laughing. He goes, why are you laughing? I said, because Jesus said he was right there. I'm going, well, boy, that messes up my theology. He was right there. And I don't know if you're familiar with, there's another new group of folks in Christian music called Maverick City Music. And they did a song called Jireh. And the second verse of that song basically says, you'd cross an ocean so I wouldn't drown. And it gets me every time when I hear it, because he hasn't forsaken me. He hasn't forgotten me, but he needs me to know he is my source and he's my only source. So as I live out these next 20 years, I want to be there for my wife. I want to be there for my daughters. I have 3 daughters. I want to be there for my grandkids. I want to be there for any pastor who needs help. But at the end of the day, I just want Jesus to give me a fist bump and say, hey, man, thanks for helping small churches. And I'm not keeping score anymore. Yeah.
So what's the next big thing for you?
Well, how do you relate big? This ministry that we're doing now, we're working with hundreds of churches every year. You can't make this stuff up. As I mentioned, Purpose Driven, Rick Warren's church, they reached out to us, and we did a set of me and a guy named Carl Vaders, who's in this same small church space, did a 4 video set with them, and it went all around the world. And as I said, our team is growing. I just started writing a new book. I'm writing another book about.
I was going to ask you have another book in the works?
Yeah, I just started it. It's along the lines of vision. And again, sure, Dale, everybody's right. Well, yes and no, because a lot of small church guys don't have vision. They don't know they're supposed to have vision, or they won't speak it out. And so their churches are suffering because if there's no vision, then nobody knows where we're going. And so I'm going to just kind of talking about helping people to understand how to bring that out of themselves. So there's another book on the horizon. We're doing conferences all over the country, and one of the other things that I'm very interested to see how it plays out is just the international connections that are happening. So again, Conrad, and I mean this with all my heart, and I would not have meant this 6 years ago or before. If I get to do all that, I'm great. If I don't do any of it, I'm great.
Mm.
I don't define my life anymore by what I do. I am who I am because Jesus saved me. When I was a 7-year-old kid at a Baptist church on a Tuesday night revival, and I recognized that I needed him to come into my life, and I asked him to come in my life, and he came into my life, and the Spirit of God came to live within me. That's never changed. And so it just took me 50-something years to be comfortable with that.
Mm.
And so, we're all a product of how we grew up. We're all a product of the wins and losses. But man, if you could ever get to a place in your life where you realize, man, God's not keeping score. He's just not keeping score. And that in itself, it'll set you free.
Mm. Wow. And with that, we'll wrap it up. How can people get a hold of you and buy your book? How can they find you?
Very simple. Go to 95, and it's the numbers 95. Don't write out the words 95. 95network.org is our website. And we have a store online there and all the connections. And you can email me there as well. It's just my email is dale@95network.org. If you're a pastor specifically of a small or mid-sized church, if you're a staffer, and you just need some support and help, that's why we exist. We exist to connect small and mid-sized churches to health building resources. And our vision is this. You'll love this one. Our vision is to bring healthy change to every church in America.
Well, that's a big task.
It is a big task. Most people say, boy, that sounds great. But I know they're thinking, yeah, right, buddy. Who knows? Because we can't do it ourselves. One of our core values is we call connections. And so if someone needs something, we try to hand them off to who can help them. But why not dream big, man?
Absolutely. Well, Dale, thank you so much for being on the Explore Purpose podcast. I really appreciate your time and your friendship over the years. And even though we haven't seen each other in, I don't know how long, it's been a while, but thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's been my privilege, and I appreciate what you're doing. And I just ask, pray that God will continue to bless it, and it'll grow, and you'll continue to impact people, especially as you keep dealing with real issues, because people are looking for answers. So thank you for what you do.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks for joining me today on the Explore Purpose podcast. If you got something out of today's program or you enjoyed it, please leave a review and subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. What are you waiting for? It's easy. Just hit the subscribe button. And be sure to sign up to join us for Explore Purpose Insiders this coming Thursday night at 7 p.m. I look forward to seeing you there. Hey, I look forward to seeing you next time right here on the Explore Purpose podcast. In the meantime, go out there, live with purpose, and let's make an impact on the world around us. Take care.